Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marissa Tonelli from HealthHIV. I want to welcome you to our Leadership Link and Learn webinar series. And today we're highlighting building board of directors leadership in sustainable CBO service delivery models. And I'm joined here by our speaker and faculty, John Winnett, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But before I do, I just want to introduce HealthHIV and our programs and welcome you to this webinar. So HealthHIV has 4 core capabilities. We do capacity building, health services research and evaluation, advocacy, and education and training. And within our capacity building programs, we reach a variety of different audiences. Our ASO CBO capacity building initiatives, including remaining relevant in the new reality, health department capacity building, workforce provider capacity building, patient-centered HIV care model capacity building with pharmacists, and a variety of other HIV prevention, care, behavioral health, and health center capacity building and technical assistance as well. And today, this particular webinar is being sponsored by our 3D HIV Prevention Technical Assistance Program. The 3D program works primarily with communities to facilitate community infrastructure development and systems coordination that ensures sustainability along the HIV care continuum. It promotes workforce development, including training the next generation of leaders in HIV prevention. We expand care team integration through partnership development to include non-clinical HIV prevention partners, demonstrate cost effectiveness and outcomes monitoring of programs to maximize strengths and efficiencies and impact of health outcomes, develop systems to improve linkage and retention in care, and also diversify funding of organizations to enhance their sustainability. So our ASO CBO Leadership Initiative is part of the 3D program. It includes a leadership training and certificate program online, a leadership link and learn monthly webinar series, which we're hosting today, a mentor-mentee program for ASO and CBO leaders, and also an online portal, our 3D portal that links ASO and CBO leaders around the country to engage with one another. If you're interested in becoming a certified ASO leader, you can take our ASO CBO Leadership Training and Certificate Program for free online. The link is posted here, and you can also download the slides or go to HealthHIV's website to access the training. Also coming soon, we are launching at the end of this year and the beginning of next year in January 2017, our Board of Directors Training Program, the BLT. Module topics for that training will include unique roles and responsibilities of ASO CBO boards of directors, nonprofit board management and governance, strategic thinking in the era of nonprofit evolution, and the dynamic HIV and healthcare landscapes. Also wanted to mention upcoming HealthHIV meetings and events. We will be hosting our annual national conference for HIV, Hep C, and LGBT health in April on the 24th and 25th in Arlington, Virginia. This is HealthHIV's annual conference called Synchronicity. And I also wanted to point out that available for download today following the webinar and some during the webinar are our information about our ASO Leadership Training and Certificate Program, the slide deck, which you can download right now from PDF at the bottom right of your screen of the Documents folder. We'll also be recording the webinar for you to download and posting Q&A that comes up. If you're interested at any point during the webinar, please feel free to query John. He's open to questions throughout his presentation, and we'll also be asking some questions of you to engage you throughout this presentation, so please feel free to use the chat box at the bottom left of your screen. As I mentioned, my name is Marissa Tonelli, and I'm the Senior Capacity Building Manager at HealthHIV, and I run our 3D program. And I'm going to introduce John Winnett, who is a social impact sector expert. John's trademark is developing and helping nonprofits, corporations, foundations, and boards of directors across North America achieve outstanding results in highly competitive environments. As the President and Chief WOW Officer of WOW Impact Strategies, John is known for creating controlled chaos throughout the nonprofit sector with his thought-provoking and sometimes controversial views on how nonprofits should think, act, and govern like successful companies. John serves as a close advisor to numerous nonprofit and corporate executives throughout the U.S. and Canada, and he also serves on the board of directors for Dining Out for Life International, which is the umbrella organization that helps raise more than $4 million annually to support the missions of over 60 HIV/AIDS service organizations across North America. Today, John is going to be addressing the following learning objectives, and we'll be chatting briefly at the end with Q&A as it comes up. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to review and clarify the roles and responsibilities of an ASO CBO board of directors, discuss the desired capacity, skills, and attributes of an effective board of directors that aligns members to strategic goals and objectives and highlight strategies to assess existing expertise, and you'll be able to identify successful approaches for executive directors and decision makers within ASOs and CBOs to mobilize an active and proactive board membership. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce John to get started on the presentation.
Thanks, Marissa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be joining you today. To give you a little more about my background, Melissa did a great job with that. So that you're aware, I've served as an executive in nonprofits ranging from $1 million to $25 million over the last 15 years, and have served on boards of directors of nonprofits as small as 100,000 up to 500 million. So as we go through the conversation today, and that's what I truly wanted to be with you as a conversation, feel free to ask questions as to how certain points and objectives apply directly to your organization based on size or scope. So it's a little bit after lunch, so I equate that to when I teach adjunct at colleges and universities, so you're all tired or you're eating while I'm talking. So without further ado, let's get started. And the first slide is going to be a little interactive. The question for you, and I believe on the call we have mainly executive directors, CEOs, and boards of directors. What are the three main roles of a board of directors? So if you can use your chat function for a moment and give me what your ideas are for the three main things that your board should be doing. And we'll take just a couple minutes to let you reply. So I can see that the responses are coming in at a pretty rapid rate at this point, and I would say that you're all pretty much in accordance to what we're going to talk about, which lets me know that we're starting this webinar out on a good foot of true understanding of what boards should do. So let's go through them for just a moment. Management and oversight is one of the key components, and that really should be more structured towards the governance side versus the word management. Strategy of an organization, and financial resources. And so let's break those down for just a moment. Under management and oversight, that really is hiring and firing the CEO or executive director, the annual CEO evaluation, overseeing and approving policies and procedures, but only in relation to governance of the organization, not internal. Under strategy, it's really about, and you'll hear me talk a lot about strategic thinking versus strategic planning. I believe you have to have a good thought and vision before you can put together a plan. What is the vision of the organization? Is the mission still relevant? Does it need to develop or evolve as the culture and landscape changes? And really policy and advocacy. Are they really working with government officials to move your agenda forward? And how are they advocating in the community? And then financial resources is kind of a vague term, but really most of you hit that one the strongest in your responses, and that is fundraising. But more importantly, that's generating resources for financial sustainability, not survival. And we'll talk a little more about that as we go on. But one last interactive moment on this slide. Those are the three components, and we've talked about what each kind of covers. Percentage-wise, what do you think as a board of directors they should be spending how much % of their time on governance and management oversight. While you're replying to that, you can also reply with strategy and financial resources. So we're going to talk about the percentages of all three. So I've got 15 and 30, and I know that's just for management and governance. But if you want to reply to all three, I'll give you about a minute, and then we'll talk about them. So I'm seeing the responses come back in at around the 30 to 50% mark, depending on the category we're discussing. This is where I take somewhat of a controversial stance in governance of nonprofits. I strongly believe in the nonprofits that I work with across North America that boards of directors, the most successful boards of directors, from small organizations to those that are 500 million plus, should only be spending 5% of their time in governance and management oversight. They should be spending about 20% of their time in strategy development. And for CEOs on the call, this will probably light up your eyes a little. I strongly believe that boards of directors should be spending 75% of their time in generating financial resources. That is what boards of directors are for, and that's where they should be utilizing the connections that they have or the connections that you need them to develop to make sure you're sustainable. I find that when we do these models in the thirds or the 50%, 25-25, that's when we get into survival mode versus sustainable long-term. So we're going to go over some specific board member responsibilities and really where does that lie between governance and management of an organization. These are actually in real time for a client that I currently have that I'm working with where we have experienced this, and these are pretty common across the sector in the last actually 3 to 5 years as regulations begin to change. A board of directors is responsible only, and there's an emphasis on only, for governance of the organization. It is their job to set the environment so that the executive team can be successful in relation to leadership and management. Sometimes the fine line between governance and management begins to blur, and we'll go through some of those examples as we talk further. When it comes to hiring staff, this is where board members, for some reason, seem to try to transition from their role in governance to really being involved in the hiring process. The only position that a board has any authority to hire or fire is the organization's chief executive, whatever that title may be, and that is it. There's really no debate about whether they get involved with other positions or not, because they only have the legal authority to hire or fire one person. Boards of directors are responsible for developing and negotiating the salary and benefits only for that chief executive. Now, can they offer suggestions and input? Sure. But that's at the pleasure of the CEO on whether to entertain those or not. And only at the invitation of the CEO may board members help in the hiring of subordinate positions. And I only recommend this at the executive team level. And I'll be very honest, I think it's very healthy to have board members involved here. If you have a development chair, you want them to be actively involved in the hiring of the chief development officer. Same thing with an operations chair committee chair with the COO. They're going to have a very close working relationship, and we need to develop that trust. But at the end of the day, board members should realize that the final decision on who the right candidate for the organization's culture and operational structure lies with the CEO. When it comes to compensation, boards of directors ensure that the organization's assets and funds are used appropriately. And that goes back to kind of the 5% management component we discussed earlier. But when it comes to true compensation, they only approve that of the chief executive officer. I recommend, and this is not standard procedure, but I recommend that the CEO of organizations have a compensation plan, which generally involves market analysis so that an HR committee, and we'll talk a little later on about specifics, approve, along with an executive committee, kind of the standards of salaries within an organization. This helps keep bias down and also helps reduce legal risk. The next one I want to hone in on very carefully, because this becomes dangerous in organizations. It is not appropriate, ethical, or legal for boards to review line item details of individual employees' salaries or to become involved in salary negotiations. It's less on the latter of those two things as asking to see every staff member's salary, benefits package, promotions, titles, etc. That is confidential legal HR information and can expose the organization, the CEO, and individual board members and the collective board to legal risk and lawsuits. Sometimes, though, the finance committee, as we talked about earlier, executive committee or HR committee, depending on how your organization is structured, will review salaries on a macro level. That's to ensure that you're being competitive in market standards. And actually, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I recommend if you're under $5 million, I recommend that you do a market analysis every 2 to 3 years. And if you're $5 million or more, that you do a market analysis every 1 to 2 years. At the end of the day, especially with millennial employees, we know that they are constantly looking for where they can make the highest impact and where the organizational culture is the strongest. It's not always about salaries, it's more about the package. And that's what they're really looking at, is how they become longevity employees for organizations. So some organizations are reviewing this annually and benchmarking against their for-profit counterparts and competitive nonprofits as well. Under workplace policies, the board is responsible for ensuring that the organization has a well-crafted set of employment policies. If you're leading an organization right now and you do not have a set of HR policies, that should be one of your top priorities. When I consult lots of organizations on legal issues around hiring or termination or discrepancy among salary offers and benefits or layoff packages, it's because that someone went with an emotional decision or a gut decision and did not follow a consistent, applicable measurement across the organization. And it puts an organization at a high level of legal risk. So this is where boards, especially if you have an HR expert on your board or if you're using a consultant, can help minimize that risk. The board carries out this duty, though, only through policy review and approval process. They are not involved in actually creating, disseminating, or implementing any policies for staff. Every 2 to 3 years, the board should ensure that the policies are reviewed by legal counsel, executive staff, and outside HR counsel. I let every organization determine whether they believe number 3 is applicable to them or not. Sometimes the legal counsel is an HR expert as well, but I am not an HR expert. And so I will never review them for legal terms for any organization I work with, because I need to make sure that every organization is protected. And as you all are well aware, HR laws change not only annually, but sometimes multiple times throughout the year, especially the new overtime law that has affected some nonprofits, but not as many once the exemption went into place, but could have been a financial strategy issue for many nonprofits involved. The focus of the board of directors is to ensure compliance and minimize risk, never, ever to enforce policy. In performance evaluations for any CEOs that are on the call, you're well aware that the board should be involved in your annual performance review, and I recommend that to be annual. Most organizations that have gotten into financial trouble or mismanagement is because one of two things: the board did not meet often enough. They met once a year or maybe even 2 times a year, and they had no real consistent evaluation method of their CEO. The chief executive's evaluation may include, and I recommend that it actually includes these people, senior staff, board members, partners, and funders. The 360 evaluation model is the best benchmark to use with CEO review processes. It's intensive, it takes a while, but it will ensure as an organization that you have the best leader leading the strategy that the board sets forward, and it also helps the CEO understand what funders and partners are really looking for out of them, both professionally and from the funding standpoint. Boards are not involved with other employee evaluations. That is strictly a management responsibility. Some additional information to consider when working hand on hand with your boards is the board is there to govern, the chief executive is there to manage. That is where the line is drawn. We've discussed kind of the specifics already. The CEO is responsible for all staff issues. Board members should not be involved in any staffing issues. If a member of the staffing team has a problem, they should not be confiding in a board member, and a board member should not be making specific requests to staff members unless the CEO is copied on it or in the conversation in person. The board of directors' main goal is to ensure the financial stability and sustainability, the key emphasis being on the second word of the organization, and that strongly means fundraising. I want to go back for just a moment to talk a little bit about point 2. This is where, when I see the ethical lines crossed with boards of directors and executives, it happens the most often. It is okay for board members to make recommendations for potential employees to hire for job postings that an organization has listed. When doing that, a board member should either forward that on to the hiring manager posted or the director of HR, whoever is listed on the job posting, with a formal letter of recommendation or a formal email of recommendation. The CEO really should only ever be copied on that if it's a member of his or her executive leadership team. That is the safest method to keep the exposure of legal risk to a minimum with organizations. It is not appropriate for board members to ask, why have you not hired Johnny or Susie that I recommended to you? If they make a recommendation to someone in the search process, it is not appropriate then for them to be in any of the interviews if that candidate is in in-person interviews. They should recuse themselves from that. So another interactive slide. How big should an ideal board of directors be? What are your thoughts? And I'm sure your boards are all over the spectrum in size, but how big do you think they should be? So the average size of a board in the United States now hovers 16 members. The median size of boards hovers 15. And I'd say that your answers are kind of in that range. Many of you, I will be honest, I think you're a little low when you talk about 6 to 8 to potentially 10 members. So as we talk about fundraising being the strategic priority and strategic visioning, it takes a breadth and a depth of board members to be able to accomplish those goals. Now, does it depend on the size of the organization? Yes. So smaller organizations many times have smaller boards because they just don't need the depth to reach at that point. However, if in your strategic vision you decide you want to double or triple the size of the organization, you have to scale your board and the caliber of your board accordingly. Who are the best board members? So this is a question I get asked a lot by organizations when they're trying to decide what are the best metrics to determine how they move their board to the next level or how do they evaluate their current board. I will tell you who is not the best board member, and that is Johnny, who is Susie's friend, and because they like each other, they should come on the board together. That actually creates chaos and danger that is not healthy for an organization. For years, I was a big fan of the board matrix, and many of you may have used it. You know, we need to look at, let's find an attorney. So that's what we're going to check off on the list. Let's find a banker. That's what we're going to check off on the list. And what I found is that's very good and acceptable for organizations who wish to remain constant and sustainable, short term. But for organizations who really want to be long-term success models, you have to realign your board matrix to what we call the strategic needs table. And this is courtesy of the Bridgespan Group, so you're more than welcome to Google and look up their research on this method. So you're taking your strategic vision and your strategic plan, and you're aligning your goals, what you're accomplishing over the next 3 to, let's say, 6 years. And then you rank in accordance under goal 1. HR is the most critical component of getting that done. Maybe it's that you're going to grow from 40 members to 100 staff members, and you know that you're going to have an HR expert on the board to do that. Well, then contract law comes into place next, because in some states, HR contracts are required. Some states are not. So you go through your strategic plan with this and list out your goals, not the necessary job titles that you're looking for. And a prime example of this is, sometimes we have organizations who decide they're going to get a new building. And so what they do is they go find a commercial real estate agent, and they put them on their board of directors. Well, after you've acquired the building, of what value does that board member now serve? They only served you in the short term. So in reality, they should have been on your building or operations committee, but not necessarily a board member. Now, if they have connections to financial resources after the fact of the acquisition, then that's a different conversation. But be very careful on who you're putting on boards of directors without long-term strategy in mind. Step 2 in the process of evaluating your board goals is your current board inventory. So listing out the current board members you have and where are their expertise. Not necessarily what industry or job title or company they're affiliated with, but where their expertise is. And step 3 is now filling the voids you have. So if you have 4 spots open, are they on a rotating scale where every 2 years, X number of board members rotate off? You should be looking at your board rotation schedules so that you have a healthy number rotating off and a new number rotating in annually, or at least biannually. And then deciding what are the highest priority areas for you to consider. I would argue, from my standpoint of being a fundraiser and then a chief executive in this industry for a long time, is that context to money is the #1 area you should be looking at. Because remember, that is their main priority, is raising the funds so you and your staff can do your job effectively as nonprofit leaders. I would also argue for many organizations that racial diversity and sometimes socioeconomic diversity should be a very close second or third. Your board should begin to look somewhat similar to the clientele you serve, if possible. I come from a background of being with 2 major boys and girls clubs, and I was always in awe that boards of directors were all white, generally all white men, but yet we serviced over 90% minorities, typically African American and Hispanic. Your board should reflect the clients. The question really is, as we look at how board members are the most effective, is that, as you all know, the days of free money are long gone. The 1990s have come and gone. Companies aren't handing out hundreds of thousands of dollars just because it's the right charitable thing to do. They are analyzing what is the ROI, and to even get to that conversation, it requires the connection to either the money itself from your board members or their connections to the influencers and decision makers. For nonprofit leaders, you can make your job easier by stacking your board with those decision makers, not people from corporations who then have to go up 2 or 3 levels to get to a decision maker to then make a call on your behalf. So strategic alignment and efficiency is what you want to look at. This is critical if your organization is going to be successful long term. Where board members can make a quick impact is identifying prospects, cultivating and involving them, asking for support. Number 3 is where all board members generally freak out unless they're not very outgoing people or in sales, and thanking over and over again. So when we look at board members and understanding the major gift timeline, and I would argue for organizations, more focus should be spent here than throwing special events. The cost of acquisition and retention in special events is much higher, even in the short and long term, than actually soliciting major gifts. So when you look at the pie chart, you can see that identifying major gifts, we talked earlier about getting board members involved, and this is a way to get them involved. Involving them with direct relationships with the major gift prospects, whether individual, corporate, or family foundations. Asking is the smallest part of this pie, but for some reason we consider it the largest hurdle. And thanking donors. If you'll notice, engaging and involving and thanking are almost the same size. To give you some percentages, identifying the prospects and ranking them should be about 10% of a board member's time, only in the major gifts realm. 45% should be involved in their interaction with the major gift prospect, and we'll talk a little later about easy ways for them to do that. Only 5%, and I would actually argue this is probably 1 to 2% of their time is actually making that ask. And that ask should be easy because if the first 55% of the chart is done correctly, the relationship has already developed and it's a natural conversation. Where the problem becomes is when organizations do what I call fire fundraising, which is, oh no, we need to meet the budget this year. They go to board members and say, we need you to find X $100,000 or we're not going to meet the budget. Then board members don't have the proper time to develop the relationships to get the gift. They have to go in cold or call their friends to ask for a gift. That does not help the organization's reputation long-term with funders. So a strategic plan on how to cultivate major gifts is critical to both your reputation as an organization and your success. There are 3 G's of board members. The question is, are they good or bad? So you've probably all heard these at some point. Whether you're a board member, you've probably been told this by an executive director or a director of development. Or if you're a CEO or DOD, you've probably told board members this. What are the 3 G's that most of us refer to board members by when we talk about their actions? So I think Patty has hit it right on the head. The 3 that we hear the most are get money, give money, or get off. And as I've said, over time, my opinion has changed on the way I handle board members. I always recommend assessing board members' personalities through tests so you know how to best engage them and work with them and make their job the easiest. And I think for years I used the terms to every board member I brought on. This is our get, give, or get off policy. Not thinking about how negative in connotation that really was. A board member's there because generally they care. They're giving you their time for free. They're offering up their connections, and they're offering up their own money most of the time. So then for us to reply to them, you either need to get, give, or get off, and put everything in a negative tone from the beginning is not building a healthy relationship with our board member. But yet, we want them to develop a relationship differently with funders. So we have to be consistent in the way we do this. I would recommend a strategy that I'm going to give you that I've used over the last almost 8 or 9 years called impact zones. So talk to board members, and for board members, talk to CEOs about this. This is the way I want to make my impact. It involves all of the same things. If you decide for every board member in the last organization, we said every board member had to have a $5,000 impact zone. So they had to make a gift that was meaningful to them. They had to get gifts, both unrestricted funding and special event funding. There is a distinction there. They're not the same. Or we evaluated their impact zone results at the end of year 1. And then you kind of go on a probationary period. And at the end of year 2, if we've not met the impact zone, then we kindly ask you to step aside because it's time to find someone who can. This helps keep kind of the negative terminology out, but also the performance requirements in at the same time. Mobilizing your board for any nonprofit leaders that are on the call or board chairs that are on the call, mobilizing your fellow board members is very critical to success. We're going to talk about 4 easy ways to mobilize them. What do you think those 4 might be? Yes, so for the question, is this being recorded? The answer is yes. You can download the audio and the slides later. So these are the 4 key ways that I recommend that you engage your board. And I will tell you that I think all of these fall within the 75% of their time of developing financial resources for your organization. Because of the causes that you specifically work with, advocacy, I think, is very key. They should be advocating with government officials, local, regional, state, potentially national, depending on your funding model, and organizations, government entities that you partner with. If you have an organization, if you have a board member that is doing an advocacy call for you, whether in person or on the phone, they need to remember one critical fact. You can only discuss one organization at a time. So while board members serve on many organizational board of directors, with a government official, you should only be talking about one during each visit or each call. From someone who came from the political spectrum first, political leaders tend to get very confused after you leave their office when you discuss multiple organizations at one time. We talked earlier about prospecting. It is okay to invite board members into a meeting when you are ranking individual, corporate, foundation donors for capacity, even propensity to give, and who they know that might be a connection. Many of the times I find that board members are very reluctant to actually rank a person, whether it's 1 to 10, A to D as a method. They get very nervous until you have a very keen level of trust with them. And they have to understand, and you must honor this trust from the staff perspective, is that whatever they say in that room always stays in that room, or with the executives that are in that room with them. But many of the times, they are the link that you need to the key connector to get to the gift. They either know the person or they know someone directly that knows them. That's why having the correct board members on your board makes this job much easier for CEOs and their chief development officer. Appreciation. This is where their impact will actually make the most influence, is having board members make thank you calls to donors at certain levels and above. For every organization, you have to decide what that means for you. And we'll talk a little bit about major gifts, but does that mean that for a small organization, your board members make personal calls at $500 and above? Likely. For large organizations, it may be $5,000 and above. But you should have an appreciation plan that deals with board members and executive staff, even potentially general operational staff, so that all of your board members are covered, or all of your donors are covered. And the final area of influence to Mobilize is engagement. Highlight stories about your board members on social media. Regardless of the way that the political arena has changed over the last couple years, especially with the last 2 presidential elections, the one thing that we do know is that social media is a key influencer to the outcome of human behavior. Corporations are watching this every day. The nonprofit and social impact sector seems to be a little behind on this. This is the easiest way, one, to do your advocacy work and to engage and mobilize everyone from a board member down to a donor and a general community supporter. But when you're highlighting things on social media, in your newsletters, hopefully for most of you those newsletters are e-versions now with an online link versus paper versions, is that you need to highlight board members' organizational involvement. That is very critical to how they're helping you. You know, here's the story of the new board chair. This is how he or she became involved. Their community involvement. What else are they doing in the community? It's okay to talk about their involvement with other organizations. It shows goodwill between nonprofit organizations not seeing each other as community competitors. And their professional involvement. If they receive a new job or they've joined a new company, tweet that out. Put it on Facebook, tag the new company, make sure you're using their hashtag and their handles. That's the way the executives at the company begin to take notice. And it's your points of touch that we use. We always talk about it takes 7 touch points to land a major gift, in theory. Those are touch points that require very little effort for organizations. And encourage the board members to retweet and repost. There are 6 key ways to engage your board members' social circle or circles, depending on their influence level. Invite their friends or colleagues on a tour of your facility. For many of you, you may have to discuss confidentiality issues with them or have them sign waivers for legal protection, but it's okay. They need to see what you do every day. I was just in Vancouver with an organization where I was talking to a board of directors, and 3 of them had never been inside the facility where they serve over 100,000 meals a year, but somehow they're supposed to actively advocate and engage funders to fund initiatives they've never actually seen. It doesn't quite work that way, ladies and gentlemen. Ask their friends or colleagues to volunteer. If you'll notice, the key word there is volunteer, not give money. When their colleagues and friends get involved with the mission directly, then the ask for money either from their friend, the board member, or you, the nonprofit executive, is much easier because they've seen the clients in real life. They see the impact and outcome directly. It's not a cold request. It's not a one-page summary synopsis that we all write and believe are wonderful. But I will be honest, someone in communications gave me the best advice several years back when she said, write down what you really believe and cut 2/3 of it out, because you always care more than the individual reading it. And when it comes to corporate funders, that's just the truth. It has to be concise, but their direct interaction will make that relationship easier. Ask them to host a reception in their home. They simply do that. Board members host a reception, let's say 8 to 16 people, depending on the size of their home. Maybe it's more if it's just cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Then they allow the executive of the organization or one of the executives to talk about the organization. You can choose whether to have a hard ask for money at the end, or maybe it's just a point of introduction and there's no ask. I would argue that option 2 is more effective. Tell them about the organization in a relaxed, fun, non-pressure environment, and then work on building the relationship with them later. Because you don't have a relationship if you invite them in that day and ask them for money, and they really know very little about your organization except what someone has told them in the last 10 minutes. Invite their friends and colleagues to your nonprofit event. Let's be honest, this is the easiest one for board members. This is where they typically thrive. They buy a table and they invite all their friends because it's not a hard, direct ask of pressure. So it's like, come have fun and let the organization do the work of exposing you. Something to consider is a model that I've used for several years where if we sell tables of 10 with organizations, I only charge board members, in theory, depending on their level, for 8 slots. The organization comps 2, but that board member has to either invite 2 of the prospects on our list and work those relationships, or they have to invite 2 prospects that they don't currently have a relationship with, unless it's maybe a vendor of their corporation. That's how you continue your pipeline of major guests and exposure. And you're rewarding your board member financially in the reduction for doing that for you. And long term, you will see, if those relationships are developed in a very healthy manner, that at least 50% of those will turn into donors if cultivated and stewarded correctly. Post announcements about your nonprofit on their social media circles. Board members are very busy. Nonprofit executives are very busy. Someone on the team internally should be writing those posts already with the tiny URLs attached, or the hyperlinks attached, or the photos ready to drop and download to make it easy. If you just tell board members, please go do this, they don't have time at the end of the day. So the more efficient and easy you make it for board members to advocate and be engaged with your organization, the more apt they are to do this. Their social media circles, especially Twitter, for those who have large followings, can be of huge value to your long-term financial gains. And arrange one-on-one meetings with the board chair and or the executive director. I always recommend trying to put a peer-to-peer ask. If you know the contact as a board member directly, then you should be in that meeting with the executive director or in that tour of the facility with the ED. If you don't know them directly, try to find another member of the board who is at the same level they are. An executive vice president meeting with another EVP, a CEO meeting with another CEO. Here's the controversial part, people. It's okay to fire board members. If they're ineffective, you need to have a conversation either as the board chair with fellow board members, that's the board chair's governance responsibility of the board in which they chair, or as the ED with the board chair and board members about that it may be time to find someone that's more effective in that role. Corporations do it every day. They find the best leaders they can find to sit on their corporate boards of directors. Why? Because they need to be the most successful companies they can be for their shareholders. Your clients deserve and demand the same. It isn't about the board member. It's not about the nonprofit executive. Every decision should be about, are we servicing the clients, current and future, to the best of our ability? And that requires you to have the best board members you can have. It also makes the nonprofit executive team's jobs much easier and more efficient. It's not a fun conversation, but most of the time, if you have it in the right manner, you'll find that many board members wanted to step aside, but didn't know how to do it without being embarrassed. Most of the time, they just don't have time. And they'll generally always ask, do they have a recommendation of someone they know to fill their spot? Then go back and make sure those recommendations fit within your strategic goals measurement. So I know we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but this is really the open-ended component about discussions and questions. So if you have any questions about how this directly relates to your organization, if there's anything you want more information on, or candidly, if you want to counter any point in this presentation, I'm more than happy to discuss it right now. So I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Health HIV. It's been my pleasure to be with all of you today. I understand the struggles both as a nonprofit executive in today's highly, highly competitive climate with over 1.3 million nonprofits in the U.S. and additional nonprofits being approved by the IRS every single day. And from a board member's perspective, of someone who sits on boards myself, I understand the struggles to balance the lines between helping organizations succeed, giving your own financial resources, and securing others while balancing your professional career. I am always available through Health HIV as a faculty member with them. Again, I appreciate your time, and I'll turn the presentation back over.
Great. Thank you so much, John. This is Marissa Tonelli again with Health HIV. I want to thank you all so much for joining us on this webinar. I'm glad to see all the very positive comments. We would very much appreciate, let's skip forward, just to reiterate, and John reiterated it, I reiterated it, the PowerPoint slide deck can be downloaded right now. If you're interested in PDF at the bottom right of your screen in the Documents folder, but we will be posting this webinar recording along with the slide deck on Health HIV's website, so healthhiv.org /resources/webinars. And there's also additional tools, webinar recordings, PowerPoint slide decks, etc. on Health HIV's 3D portal. Following this webinar, if you close out, you should be redirected automatically to a SurveyMonkey survey evaluation. And if you don't get redirected, we would encourage you to please fill out the webinar evaluation at surveymonkey.com /r/Health HIV webinar. And that will just help Health HIV as well as John Winnett as one of our ongoing faculty members to continue to evolve this presentation and make sure it's applicable to a variety of audiences and addresses your current capacity building and training needs. If you have any other additional questions, comments, TA, or capacity building needs, if you're interested in engaging John Winnett through HealthHIV via our capacity building efforts, you can contact Shayna Linog. Shayna is our capacity building coordinator, and her email is shayna@healthhiv.org, and her phone number is 202-507-4739. And that's the end of our webinar for today. Again, if you are interested in any of our other programs, please go to HealthHIV's website. Our 3D portal has a majority of our capacity building assistance programs, and you can wait until after this webinar, as I mentioned, for the recording, but the slides are available now at the bottom right of the screen. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Bye-bye.